Some say it is the place that makes art. Some say it is the time that makes art, the sense of what art and history demand at a certain juncture. Another view, and I share it, sees art as formed still more by the imperative necessities of an individual temperament. Cezanne, more than any painter I can think of, persuades me that the subject of painting is an artist's continuing sense of purpose. The sense by which an individual lives his everyday life is the sense of sight. Yet the eye generates and nourishes another kind of life as well, the mental life that builds sensations into structures and harmonies that raise the spirit. It builds unities that are not only observed, but reasoned. Cezanne was born here in Aix-en-Provence. He died here. Before Cezanne painted in Provence in the 19th century, one couldn't have imagined that the natural terms in which the world is seen, the warm and the cool of it, the red and yellow and blue of it, could be built into structures so grand, so mind-stretching. Provence flourishes and burns in the sun, and it's scourged by a tempestuous wind. Cezanne's turbulent, lifelong affair with the violence of nature, as well as its sunny, peaceful face, shows us a new way for the imagination to build its dream of natural grandeur. The majestic background to Aix, the Mont Sainte-Victoire, is a natural subject for Aix painters, and Cezanne painted it often. Wherever he looked, there it was. At home, it was over the garden wall. When his brother-in-law bought a farm, The greatest of all the views of it appeared across the valley. The mountain itself was like an heroic theme from history, and the variations that Cezanne composed on it were to become the triumphant music of his life. He was overwhelmed by this country. He wrote as a young man in a poetic ecstasy of self-committal, "Rocks, crush me. Earth, swallow me up." The happiest days of Cezanne's boyhood were the days spent in the company of school friends, among them Émile Zola, to swim, climb, discuss hopeless, visionary loves, and shout romantic poetry under the trees. The sense of comradeship and the country always remained for Cezanne the sentiment stirred in us by the good son of Provence. They remained with him forever as the memory of a lost paradise. Cezanne was impelled by passion from the start, and by the end of his life, his passion was fulfilled in a wholly new harmony parallel with nature. Like most artists, Cezanne never sold enough to live on, and until he was 49, he remained dependent on the allowance his father, the self-made banker of Aix, paid him. For as long as his father lived, Cezanne was at the mercy of a remarkable and formidable man, impatient and ruthless, like a character in Balzac, and generally unsympathetic to his son. In his 20s, Cezanne's mood was black and violent. In the painting of murder, violence like a terrific gust of wind overtakes an innocent victim. Indeed, it dismembers murderer and victim alike. The rape was a dream of erotic fatality. The bodies convulse in a quivering knot. There's nothing like this cruel passion in the painting of Cezanne's generation. It is the last convulsion of the dream of the romantic movement that habitually mingled love and death. It was a dream that never augured well for the dreamer. But between dreams of violence and grief, Cezanne, in his 20s, painted one group of pictures that was solid and stable. His uncle Dominic was made to pose for a series of portraits that were very capable and thoroughly controlled, and Cezanne painted one every afternoon. Anyone who paints portraits like this at the rate of one a day is uncommonly talented. And Cezanne had an insight that was more remarkable still. He realized that painting in tones of grey paved the way to pictures united by tone. He saw that painting touch with a palette knife must be built in troweled slabs throughout. He had evolved to himself the modern idea of a unity inherent in the handling of paint. The theory of painting that Cezanne developed gave first place, as the indispensable essence of art, to the artist's temperament. The animating force of character that alone gave meaning to whatever he did. The monumental quality that he gave his painter friend, Empereur, endowed the little hunchback with dignity. It was the tribute of one powerful personality to another. He recognized a kinship to the instability and desperation of his own mood, which never left him all his life. The Empereur portrait bears a plain, proud claim for his friend and for painting. Achille, Empereur, painter. And it's stenciled on the canvas. It's part of the painting, an integral part of the new picture object. 40 years later, Picasso and Braque not only stenciled the inscriptions that were part of their paintings, they owed their whole freedom to Cezanne. In 1872, the turbulence of Cezanne's image of himself was turning into something else. Love was no longer inseparable from death. Indeed, he was living in Paris as happily as he ever did, with a girl. Their son had just been born. He went to stay in Auvers, 25 miles from Paris, and modelled his work and himself on his friend, the Impressionist Camille Pissarro. There was nothing temperamental about Pissarro as Cezanne drew him going out to work. Cezanne followed Pissarro on this pilgrimage to nature, and the disciple was soon the teacher. One of Cezanne's paintings at Auvers had the monumental solidity which he wanted to give Impressionism. Cezanne entitled the picture A Cottage at Auvers-sur-Oise, but people called it La Maison du Pendu, and the name stuck, the House of the Hanged Man. Cezanne himself was nicknamed Le Pendu among the artists at Auvers. The massiveness of the subject is encrusted as if gilded with the pale gold of early spring. Yet the radiance points to a solemnity, a brooding quality in the way the deserted house receives the sunlight. The house is planted in the chalky clay, wedged between the curving slopes of turf and thatch. The black mood and the black palette of Cezanne's 20s had cleared. The bad was made good. The sense of violence and of loss was repaired. The radiance of La Maison du Pendu is a sublimation. It turned the savage discord of his 20s towards the harmony parallel with nature. The Maison du Pendu is not an impressionist picture. The sunlit crusts of paint are too substantial for that. Cezanne needed the Impressionists and Impressionism more as an emotional support than as a technique. Cezanne was now producing his own version of the paradox of Western painting. In this tradition, it sometimes seems that the conceptions of humble and colossal are quite inseparable. Something saintly in Pizarro's example must have helped Cezanne to an achievement that utterly surpassed it. The portrait of himself against a pink background, which he painted at Auvers, is the embodiment of a faith and shows it as sublime, staunch beyond measure. In another age, if memory of Cezanne is lost, when people find the self-portrait au fond rose, they will conclude that there was an unknown school of religious painters near Paris in the 1870s, and that this is a great St. Peter, if not a St. Paul, who has lost his halo. They'll be right. The unshakable stance to nature and to art, which the sublimation of Cezanne's passion gave him, is the rock on which the modern spirit sometimes rather incongruously built its church. In Cezanne's pursuit of self-possession, the self-portrait au fond rose was a giant stride. Soon, he had an admirer who bought his work in quantity. Victor Choquet, a civil servant in customs and excise. Choquet became not only a patron and a friend, but a personal example of the kind that meant most to Cezanne. He represented serenity and self-command, the grand equilibrium of vital faculties that Cezanne said he wanted most. The block-like unity which he built into his portrait of Choquet in his patron's apartment in Paris was the unity of colour. Colours press one against another to make an image like architecture, cemented unshakably, figure, furniture, frames and all, into the rectangle of the picture. Colour builds a noble head like masonry. It weaves the fingers, shapes their delicate discriminating length with the wedges of violet shadow between. Colour made the portrait of Hortense, the mother of his son. It made her monumental and also tender, both at once. Stripes of blue and yellow press against each other to build the shape. But each colour, however strong and pressing, carries in it some of the other, as if to complete it. There were yellow modulations in the blue stripes, and on the yellow wallpaper the pattern is blue. The red armchair modulates into violet. The blue-green shadows on the head serenely complement the orange-pink lights. Cezanne found that colours defined landscape too in the new way. Colour took on the density of natural things, and the Pool of the Sisters, where he was painting, materialised out of the parallel troweling of the patches, as the image was to materialise out of the colour patches of his last works. Through colour, he responded most delicately to the facts of a place. The swelling and narrowing of a trunk, the bending of branches, and the oblique parallels of leaves are the lines along which colours meet and divide the surface in a living pattern. The alignments across the space are the angles at which the leaves receive their share of the light filtering down from the unseen sky in an exact and uniform slant, as leaves do. The parallel patches knit together like Choquet's fingers. Clasped hands always remained a metaphor for the integration which Cezanne admired in Choquet and sought in painting.
He used to demonstrate it with the very gesture that he had portrayed. I grasp my motif, he said. He joined his hands. That's what a motif is, do you see? That's what you have to get. He separated his hands, then brought them together again, interlacing the fingers, but slowly. If I pass too high or too low, everything is ruined. Not one link can be loose, to leave a crevice where light or truth can escape. If these volumes correspond to the planes, the patches, which exist there under our eyes, very well. My picture joins hands. It is truthful and full.
When Cezanne was 39, his father made a last effort to get him away from Hortense. He cut off his son's allowance and opened his mail. Cezanne came out of the ordeal with a hard-won independence, and it was entrenched in style. It wasn't merely a new kind of mark, it was a new philosophy, a new marriage of vision to flatness. It was a new conception of the art of painting and of the painter himself. The grandeur now had extraordinary simplicity and scale. The fruit on his studio bench, even the round rim of his fruit dish, took on a lumpish massiveness. More than anything else, he wanted to realize, to make real in paint, his sense of nature and of art. He used to speak of this beautiful nature, man, woman, still life. Fidelity may not satisfy forever. At 46, the misery of his attempt at infidelity was severe and left his view of himself more austere than ever. He was shorn at last of all the signs of flamboyant temperament. The man, the palette, and the picture, the three terms of a painter's dialectic, were each as spare and block-shaped as the others. In this mood, Cezanne reconstructed his art on the model of building. He set solid, cubic houses against the solid flank of the mountain. Yet painting wasn't sculpture. He said it took him 20 years to find that out. He needed to embody everything in unbroken flatness. He had to bring nearness and distance together in a single jigsaw without overlapping. Working in the north again, he reconciled near and distant another way. He incorporated them in a shimmering screen of crisscross brushstrokes. He had turned back from gaunt intransigence. Cezanne was ready for the directness and simplicity of classicism. He cherished two dreams. One of them, very much his own, was the dream of male companionship. The boy bathers were an unparalleled subject, and there was a stern nobility about these pictures, like a mythology invented entirely anew. The women bathers filled an altogether more traditional dream of sensuous fulfillment and relaxation. The bathers are the most original part of Cezanne's work. For the first time in nearly 30 years, the artist whose method was still submission to nature wasn't painting major pictures from life. He was assembling them from his old art school drawings, from classical sculpture in the Louvre, and from plaster casts. All these were built into a splendid architectural symmetry. His theme was the traditional rendering of the nude, and in particular the contour on which it depends. The line that mounts like a wave or forks, divides and duplicates. The wiry, energetic line, obedient to the architecture that rules it. In front of this great picture, I've thought the real subject was the contour in itself, the dynamic element of art. Nothing else matters so much. Indeed, when the line is purest and strongest, nothing else matters at all, as if the linear purpose meant so much that its actual object, the content inside the contour, could sometimes be overlooked. The line of a back and the line of a front may each be so fine, so fulfilled in themselves, that there's no room for a body between. And perhaps no need. That's the startling thing. The back arches, with a sublime resilience that generates the wave of hair, the mounting bulges of belly, breast and shoulder justly establish the plane of cheek. But between cheek and hair, no head, not even the token knob, which elsewhere humanity has to settle for. The humanism of this new art is the outrageous liberty that it accords to a human faculty, the strenuous faculty of drawing. In Cezanne's grandest pictures, he crowned the great tradition and also single-handed overthrew it. It was an open invitation to the next generation, people like Picasso and Matisse and Braque, to reconsider its expectations from painting, and so eventually to revise its whole image of man. At 60, Cezanne returned to Provence and swore to end his days painting the country, which he realized he was deeply in love with. The love kept him alive, but he sometimes wondered if he would die like Moses before he entered the promised land that he began to see, the world reconstructed and realized afresh in the affinities and contrasts of color. Cezanne was careful to disabuse his admirers of any idea that he was copying the appearance of things. He turned on them, he turns on us. What are we to think of those imbeciles who say that the artist is always subservient to nature? Art is a harmony parallel with nature. Cezanne rebelled against the subservience of Impressionism. If nothing in painting is truly like nature, except the visible working together of color, then the painter with his eyes and his mind must augment this active ingredient until its relationships and mutual effects are as compelling as any color can be, until they compare, as he wrote almost despairingly, with the magnificent richness that animates nature. Cezanne feared that he didn't command color rich enough. Quite wrongly. It was just what he did command and what his last pictures offered. Connections and contrasts of color work together in a way that we can believe nature works. As he looked fixedly at his motif day by day, color took control. But the patch of color didn't record likeness. It made no sense to ask if the paint matched a color in the subject. Certainly the sky is blue, but it's also green. The orchard is green, but it's equally blue. If the distant mountain is blue, it's also ochre, the golden ochre that reappears in grass and foliage and house, relating them everywhere, one with another. It's the relationship that affirms the presence of nature. The affinities and contrasts between the patches work by analogy, not by resemblance. We are now accustomed to these meanings in painting, meanings that are intrinsic as music is. If any composer compares with Cezanne, it is John Sebastian Bach. If any painter parallels the intrinsic structure of music, it is Paul Cezanne. In every part of the painting, the spectrum order, from yellow through green into blue, makes the steps that shape the solidity of form. In Cezanne, the inward life of art was lived with a grandeur and a fiery passion equal to the noblest works of man. Visibly living that inward life of art, he has given to his successors the awareness of a faculty that remains new and richly potent to this day. He has enabled us to recognize that inherent life in his predecessors, Vermeer and Masaccio among them. Great painting, the great image of a real world, is precious because everything, all the quality of living and the mental endeavor of humankind, seems forever to be different.